Full story, from bullied to beautiful, how she took control of her own narrative. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we dive into an inspiring full story of transformation, strength, and self-discovery. Follow Sarah's emotional journey as she battles family expectations and overcomes personal challenges to reclaim her confidence and happiness. This story is a powerful reminder that no matter what obstacles life throws our way, we have the power to change our story. If you're moved by Sarah's journey, don't forget to like and subscribe to Silent Wars for more inspiring content like this. Growing up in a small town in Maine, Sarah, was always the bigger sister. From the moment I stepped into kindergarten, I stood out. Not because of my charm or any special qualities, but simply because of my size. I was different, and unfortunately, that difference didn't go unnoticed. As a child, I didn't fully understand the weight of being the bigger one, but I quickly learned that it meant being singled out in a world that favored the slim and the sleek. As I entered middle school, my body continued to expand, and so did the teasing. It was relentless. My classmates called me names, whispered behind my back, and made cruel jokes. They would exclude me from games, parties, and social gatherings, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own life. The worst part was how invisible I felt in the eyes of my peers. It wasn't just about being overweight. It was about how my size seemed to erase everything else about me. I became defined by my appearance, and everything I said or did was overshadowed by that single trait. High school was a whole new level of struggle. The bullying intensified as I grew older, and the whispers in the hallways turned into loud, mocking laughter. Every day felt like a battle, and I found myself sinking deeper into isolation. I was the target of every cruel comment, every joke, and every look of pity. But the most hurtful part wasn't the words themselves. It was the feeling of being seen only for what I lacked, never for what I had to offer. In those dark moments, I found solace in books. They became my refuge, my escape from a world that felt too harsh. In the pages of novels, I could lose myself in adventures and stories where the characters were valued for their minds, their courage, their hearts, not their appearance. In books, I wasn't the fat girl anymore. I was simply Sarah, a person who deserved to be seen and loved for all the things that made me whole. Reading became my therapy, my way to cope with the pain of rejection and the relentless teasing. It was in those pages that I found comfort, a place where I could imagine a life beyond the labels and the hurt. It wasn't an easy journey, but through books, I learned the power of self-acceptance and the importance of valuing who I was on the inside. In the end, books didn't just offer me an escape, they gave me the strength to survive, and eventually, to thrive. My sister Jessica was everything I wasn't. While I struggled with the weight of my insecurities, she seemed to glide through life with ease. From a young age, Jessica had an effortless charm that drew people to her. She was popular, slim, and always the center of attention. Everything she did seemed flawless in the eyes of our parents, who praised her for her accomplishments and radiant personality. To them, Jessica could do no wrong. She had a way of walking into a room and instantly commanding the attention of everyone there, leaving me to fade into the background, unnoticed and unheard. I often felt invisible next to her. In school, while I faced the cruelty of bullies and the sting of being excluded, Jessica had a different experience. She fit in effortlessly, making friends wherever she went, and seemed to have everything I lacked. She was the it girl at school, the one everyone wanted to be around. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, introverted girl who found comfort in books, my escape from the relentless teasing and isolation I endured. While I spent my days trying to avoid ridicule, Jessica had the world at her feet. But then, everything changed. As she entered high school, I saw a side of Jessica I had never expected. The girl who had always been my protector, the one I'd looked up to, began to join in with the bullies. At first, it was subtle, small jokes made in passing, comments about my weight or my awkwardness in social situations. But soon, it became more blatant. Jessica, who had always been my sister, became part of the group that made me feel worthless. She laughed at the jokes made at my expense and even started mocking me in front of her friends. The pain I felt was unbearable. The one person I had always hoped would understand me, would stand up for me, was now turning her back on me. But instead of confronting her, instead of letting her see how deeply her actions hurt, I kept it all inside. I didn't want to show any vulnerability. I didn't want to admit that my sister, the one person I thought would always have my back, was now causing me the greatest pain of all. I kept silent, swallowed my tears, and continued to retreat further into myself. The loneliness grew, but the shame of being ridiculed by my sister was something I couldn't share. It felt like the world had betrayed me, not just the bullies at school, but someone I had trusted and loved my whole life. The cruelty of those moments would stay with me for a long time, and it took everything in me not to break under the weight of it all. My parents never truly understood the depth of the pain I was experiencing. They loved to boast about my academic achievements, how I was always the top student, how proud they were of my grades, my dedication to school. But when I tried to explain the emotional toll my sister Jessica's actions were taking on me, they simply shrugged it off. To them, it was just typical sibling rivalry, something I should learn to ignore. After all, Jessica was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. They didn't see how her actions, her mockery, and her cruelty were chipping away at my self-esteem, piece by piece. As I grew older, I hoped things would get better. I hoped time would heal the wounds between Jessica and me, that one day she would realize how much her actions hurt me. But it didn't. Instead, Jessica's bitterness toward me only seemed to grow. It was as if every time I succeeded, it reminded her of her own insecurities, and she reacted by tearing me down. The more I excelled academically, the more she resented me. At first, it was subtle, small comments, a sharp word here and there, but then it escalated. Years later, when I thought I had left the past behind me, Jessica made a drunken confession that would forever change my view of her. In a moment of vulnerability, she admitted that she had sabotaged my projects out of jealousy. She had deliberately ruined my schoolwork, stolen my homework, and undermined my efforts just because she couldn't stand seeing me succeed. Hearing those words, hearing her admit that she actively tried to hinder my success, was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It wasn't just a phase. It was betrayal. It was malice. And it was something I could never forget. I had always hoped that time would heal our bond, that one day we would be able to laugh about it and move on. But as adults, we never truly rebuilt our relationship. The cracks had run too deep. Every attempt to reconnect felt strained and forced, and the bond we once shared as sisters seemed irreparably broken. Even when we saw each other, there was an unspoken tension between us, a distance that I couldn't bridge. Jessica's jealousy, her sabotage, and the lack of support from my parents had created a chasm that nothing could fill. The pain of her actions lingered long after the high school years had passed. And now, as an adult, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever truly heal from the hurt that had been inflicted by someone I once trusted the most. The realization that my sister had actively sought to undermine me left me questioning the entire nature of our relationship and whether it was ever truly as loving and supportive as I had believed. Last summer, I decided to visit home for the first time in years. I was genuinely excited to reconnect with my family, thinking that time apart would have healed some old wounds. I had made progress in my life personally, professionally, and emotionally, and I was hopeful that this family gathering would be a positive experience. However, what was supposed to be a joyful occasion quickly turned into a moment of humiliation. During the lunch, Jessica casually announced that she was engaged. Everyone clapped, and the room filled with excited chatter. It should have been a moment for her, a celebration of her newfound happiness. But then, just when I thought everything was going smoothly, Jessica turned to me with a mockingly sweet smile and asked, "So, what have you been doing with your life?" I didn't get a chance to answer before she cut me off, her voice suddenly loud and cruel. "Why are you still fat? I mean, shouldn't you have lost weight by now if your life is so great?" The words hit me like a slap. The entire room fell silent. I froze, unable to speak. It was as though the years of progress I had made, the confidence I had built, all vanished in that instant. But the worst part wasn't just Jessica's words, it was the fact that my parents, who had always been the ones to reassure me, joined in. They echoed Jessica's sentiment, expressing concern about my weight, as if it were the only thing that mattered. My mother, with a tone of thinly veiled worry, casually remarked, "It's just surprising, sweetheart, given how well you're doing. Don't you think it's time to focus on your health?" Then my father chimed in, saying, "And what about starting a family? You've been so focused on your career, but you're getting older. Don't you want a family of your own?" The words were spoken as though they were casual observations, but each one cut deeper than I could have imagined. I felt like I had been transported back to my childhood when my worth was measured by my size, and everything else, all my accomplishments, meant nothing. For years, I had worked hard to build my life, to become successful in my career, and to gain independence. But in that moment, it was clear that none of it mattered to them. My weight was the only thing they saw when they looked at me. As they continued their critique, I tried to hold it together. I wanted to scream, to tell them how much their words hurt, but instead, I remained silent, swallowing the pain. I had worked so hard to prove that I was more than just my appearance, and yet, here I was, sitting in front of the people who were supposed to love me, feeling smaller than ever. It was the breaking point, the moment I realized that no matter what I did, I would never meet their expectations. It wasn't just about my weight. It felt like everything about me was under scrutiny, from my career choices to my independence, and even my relationship status. I had spent years building a life that I was proud of, achieving professional success, cultivating a strong sense of independence, and making meaningful contributions in my community. Yet, in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. All my parents saw was my weight, my lack of a romantic partner, and the fact that I wasn't married with children. They showered Jessica with praise for her engagement, as though her achievement was the pinnacle of success, and it stung more than I had anticipated. As they discussed her wedding plans, all the attention seemed to shift toward what I was lacking. Their focus wasn't on the life I had built, or the fact that I had created a fulfilling and meaningful existence outside of their narrow expectations. Instead, they relentlessly pointed out the things I hadn't done: settling down, getting married, and starting a family. The more they praised Jessica, the more I felt invisible. My achievements seemed to be overlooked entirely in favor of what they deemed important. They couldn't understand that my happiness and fulfillment weren't tied to traditional markers like marriage or children. Jessica, with her usual biting tone, added fuel to the fire when she turned to me and said, "I just hope you have a date for my wedding. I don't want people thinking my sister is some miserable old woman." The cruelty of those words hit harder than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about my appearance anymore. It was about my very worth. No matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked to create a successful and independent life, it would never be enough for them. To them, My life was incomplete because I wasn't living it the way they thought I should. It was as though my entire existence, all the things I had worked for, meant nothing compared to their vision of what a woman should be. I had never felt so misunderstood. It was hurtful, yes, but it was also infuriating. For years, I had tried to live up to their expectations, but no matter how much I accomplished, they always found something more to criticize. They couldn't comprehend that a woman could be happy, fulfilled, and successful without adhering to their idea of what success looked like. It was as if they were blind to everything I had done and could only see what I lacked. In that moment, I realized something crucial. No matter how much I tried to meet their expectations, it would never be enough. I could lose weight, get married, and have children, but they would always find something else to hold over me. The frustration of it all finally hit me. I would never be able to earn their approval on my own terms. The emotional toll of that family lunch hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the cruel comments from my parents and Jessica. It was the realization that no matter how much I did, no matter how hard I worked to carve out a life that was fulfilling and meaningful to me, it would never be enough for them. For days, I allowed myself to feel the weight of their words, the sting of their judgments, but eventually I decided I couldn't let this pain define me. Instead of allowing their criticism to consume me, I decided to channel it into something powerful. I decided to take control of my own life, not to meet their expectations, but to fulfill my own. I wasn't going to lose weight to please them or anyone else. I was going to do it for me. This time, it wasn't about proving them wrong, it was about reclaiming my power, about taking charge of my own body and my own happiness. I realized that I had been living my life based on their views of who I should be, and it was time to break free from that. I joined a gym, committed to a strict diet, and even hired a personal trainer who would help me stay on track. My trainer wasn't just there to guide me physically. She was there to remind me that this journey was about more than just losing weight. It was about finding myself. The transformation was hard at first, but it felt empowering. Every workout, every healthy meal, was a step toward the woman I wanted to become. For the first time in my life, I was doing something just for me, not for anyone else. As the pounds began to shed, I began to feel lighter in more ways than one. It wasn't just my body that was changing, it was my entire outlook on life. The confidence that I had always lacked started to emerge, and for the first time in years, I felt good about who I was. I started to look at myself in the mirror and see a person I didn't recognize, but in a good way. She was strong, confident, and proud. She wasn't perfect, but she was real, and I liked her. This transformation wasn't just about losing weight. It was about shedding the emotional baggage I had carried for years, the judgment, the self-doubt, the constant feeling of never being good enough. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. This was my journey, and I was no longer doing it to prove anyone wrong. I was doing it to prove to myself that I was worthy, that I could love and accept myself exactly as I am. As the months passed and my hard work started to pay off, something shifted inside me. The pounds continued to drop, but so did the emotional barriers I had spent years building. With every pound I lost, I shed pieces of the old version of myself, the one who had been weighed down by insecurity, doubt, and the constant feeling of not measuring up. For the first time in years, I felt free. I felt like I could finally step out of the shadows and show the world who I truly was. When my parents invited me home for a family lunch to finalize wedding plans for Jessica, I hesitated. I knew this would be a pivotal moment, the first time they would see me since I had made such a dramatic transformation. I wasn't sure how they would react, but I knew I couldn't hide any longer. I had worked too hard to get to this point, and this was my chance to show them that I had changed, not just on the outside, but on the inside too. I was no longer the girl they had left behind. I was someone new. someone proud of who I had become. When I walked through the door of my parents' house, their jaws dropped. I could see the shock on their faces as they took in the new version of me. It was like they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. For a moment there was silence, and I felt a strange sense of empowerment. They had never truly seen me before, not the way I had always wanted them to. But now, they had no choice but to acknowledge the woman standing in front of them. But Jessica, she didn't recognize me at first. Her eyes scanned my face and body, almost as if she was trying to find something familiar, something that hadn't changed. Then, with a look of disbelief, she asked, "Is that really you?" It was almost as if the change in me was too much for her to process. She walked over to me, her fingers pressing into my stomach, as if to confirm that I had really lost all that weight. Her actions were so uncomfortable, but I didn't let them faze me. I stood tall, holding my head high, proud of the woman I had become. Jessica's forced laugh didn't fool anyone. It was clear that she was uncomfortable, perhaps even jealous, and it felt oddly satisfying to see her reaction. For so long, I had been the one to feel inferior, the one who was ignored or ridiculed. But now, the tables had turned. And for the first time, I knew that I didn't need their approval to feel good about myself. I had already found the validation I needed from within. The woman I saw in the mirror was someone I respected, someone I admired. And that was more than enough. The surprise of my transformation didn't last long. As the shock wore off, Jessica's true feelings started to show. It was clear that she couldn't hide her jealousy, and her sharp, cutting remarks began to spill out. I had hoped that, with the way my family had reacted to my changes, maybe Jessica would be happy for me, or at the very least, be neutral. But that wasn't the case. Instead, she took every opportunity to belittle the hard work I had put in to transform myself. She started making cruel, snide comments. "No way you look this good on your own," she said with a sneer. "You must have had surgery. There's no way someone could change this much naturally." Her words stung, but not as much as they once would have. She didn't know it, but she had just underestimated me. Back in the day, her words would have brought me to tears. But not anymore. I wasn't the same person I had been years ago, the insecure, self-doubting girl who let everyone else's opinions define her. I felt a surge of confidence that I hadn't known I was capable of. The hurtful comments Jessica threw my way were no longer going to have the same impact. I had worked too hard to get here, and I wasn't about to let her drag me down again. I looked at her, steady and calm, and with a newfound strength, I said, "Jessica, I've always been beautiful. Losing weight just enhanced my features. Maybe you should try self-love sometime." The shock on her face was priceless. I could see her trying to process my words, trying to understand that I wasn't the same vulnerable person I used to be. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself, and it felt empowering. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about claiming my voice and my worth. In that moment, I realized I didn't need to defend my choices to anyone, least of all to her. The silence that followed was thick. Jessica didn't know how to respond, but I wasn't looking for a response. I wasn't looking for validation from her or anyone else. The only approval I needed was my own. I had worked so hard to become this version of myself, and for the first time, I was proud of who I was inside and out. And that was all that mattered. As the lunch went on, I began to realize something I had suspected for a long time. My family couldn't handle the new me. After all the hard work I had put into transforming myself, I thought that maybe they would finally be proud of me, proud of how far I had come, proud of the confidence I had gained. But instead, I found myself facing the same criticism I had always received. Only now, it was wrapped in a different form. My mom, with a hint of sarcasm in her voice, looked at me and suggested, "Maybe you should go back to your natural hair color." This blonde look is a bit too flashy." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. Here I was, standing in front of them, the person I had worked so hard to become, and the first thing my mom could say was that my hair was too much. It was as if no matter how much I changed, I would never be able to live up to their expectations, especially when it didn't fit into their narrow idea of what was acceptable. Then, as if on cue, my dad chimed in, adding to the sting. "Jessica's always been the blonde daughter," he said. "Maybe you should just go back to your old self. You know, fit in a little more." The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents were the ones who had pushed me to lose weight for Jessica's wedding, telling me how important it was to look presentable. They had practically demanded that I change myself to fit their idea of beauty. And now that I had transformed, now that I was finally comfortable in my own skin, they couldn't accept the person I had become. The realization that they couldn't appreciate the changes I had made, the improvements to my life and my confidence, was more painful than I had anticipated. It wasn't just about my appearance, it was about my sense of self. I had worked tirelessly to get to this point, and I thought they would see that. But instead, I was being told that who I had become wasn't enough. The person I had become wasn't the person they had envisioned, and that hurt more than I had words to express. It was a harsh truth, one that made me question how much I had tried to please them over the years. No matter what I did, it seemed like it would never be enough to win their approval. They didn't see the person I had worked hard to become. They only saw the past version of me, and it wasn't the one they were willing to accept. It was like I had to choose. Continue trying to fit into their mold or live my life unapologetically as the person I had finally grown into. And in that moment, I knew the answer. I had worked too hard to be anyone else but me. The conversation reached its breaking point when I stood up, feeling an overwhelming surge of emotion and strength. I looked at my family, all of them sitting there, trying to find fault with the person I had become. With a calmness I hadn't known I was capable of, I asked them, "Why can't I be blonde too? Does Jessica own that color?" My words hung in the air, sharp and defiant. There was a moment of silence as they searched for a response, but there was nothing. They were speechless. In that brief pause, something inside me clicked. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time, I saw the situation clearly. I realized that no matter how much I changed, no matter how much I tried to meet their expectations, I would never be able to please them. It didn't matter if I lost weight, if I wore the right clothes, if I got my hair done the way they thought was acceptable. No matter what I did, I would always be held to their standards, which had nothing to do with who I truly was. That moment of clarity was a turning point for me. I had spent so much of my life trying to be what they wanted me to be, hoping that if I could just change enough, they would finally see me. But they never did. They never saw the person I had always been, the one who was smart, capable, and strong. They only saw what I wasn't. It was never enough. So, I decided to take control of my own story. I didn't need their approval anymore. I looked them in the eyes and said, "I've always been amazing just as I am, but none of you ever saw it. Now that I've lost weight, it's still not enough for you." Those words were the final blow. It wasn't just about my physical transformation, it was about finally standing up for myself, finally acknowledging that I was worthy exactly as I was. In that moment, I realized that I didn't need to spend another second trying to earn their approval. I had spent my whole life chasing something that wasn't even within my reach, but I didn't need them to define my worth. I had built my life, I had made myself stronger, and I had learned to love myself on my terms. And if that wasn't enough for them, then I was done trying to fit into their mold. I walked away from that lunch feeling lighter than I ever had before, not because I had lost weight, but because I had finally stopped carrying the weight of their expectations. It was a weight I no longer needed to bear. I decided to attend Jessica's wedding, not out of a desire for revenge, but to finally take control of my own narrative. For so long, my family had defined my worth, my appearance, and my value. It was time to flip the script. I had worked hard for this transformation, both inside and out, and I knew that attending the wedding was the perfect moment to step into my power and show them that I had become the person I always wanted to be, regardless of their approval. When I walked into the wedding reception, I could feel all eyes on me. The shock on my parents' faces was priceless. They hadn't seen me in months, and they were stunned by how much I had changed. Their jaws dropped, their eyes widened, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of disbelief in their expressions. They couldn't believe it. I could almost hear the unspoken questions in their heads. How had I done it? Was this really their daughter, the one they had once dismissed? But Jessica? She was a different story. As soon as she saw me, her face twisted in irritation. She stormed over to me, her eyes scanning me up and down. Without even a moment of grace, she started making rude, cutting remarks about my appearance, trying to tear me down with her words. It was clear that Jessica had never expected me to change so drastically. She had always been the golden girl, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. Now I was the one who had stolen the spotlight, and she couldn't handle it. But this time, I didn't let her get to me. I stood tall, kept my composure, and didn't allow her bitterness to affect me. I had worked too hard to let her jealousy knock me down. Instead, I mingled with the guests, who were genuinely impressed by my transformation. People complimented me on how radiant and confident I looked, and it felt like a victory I hadn't anticipated. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was being seen for who I truly was. At one point, I even met Jessica's fiancé. He gave me an inappropriate compliment saying, "You're beautiful." I didn't know Jessica had such a stunning sister. His words were awkward, but I brushed them off with a smile, knowing that Jessica's fiancé was clearly uncomfortable with the shift in dynamics. He hadn't expected this new version of me either. The evening was filled with surprises. I could feel the jealousy and resentment simmering beneath Jessica's cool exterior. But it didn't matter to me anymore. I wasn't there to make her feel better or to meet anyone's expectations. I was there to celebrate my own journey and to remind myself that I didn't need anyone's approval to feel good about who I was. For once, I felt truly free. And that, to me, was the ultimate revenge. After the wedding, I left without a second thought. I had made my point. For years, I had lived my life trying to meet my family's expectations, constantly bending myself to fit their narrow view of who I should be. But not anymore. As I walked away from that event, I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't known in years. The old me, the one who tried to please everyone and hide her true self, was gone. I had finally reclaimed my power, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my family, dictate who I was or what I should become. For so long, I had been the invisible daughter, the one who didn't measure up in their eyes. But now, with every step I took away from that wedding, I felt stronger. I had proven that I could stand on my own, that my worth was not defined by their approval or their superficial standards. I wasn't going to live my life in their shadows anymore. I was going to live it on my own terms, and if they couldn't accept that, then it was their problem, not mine. As for Jessica, I knew exactly how things would unfold. I wasn't trying to predict her failure, but it was impossible to ignore the pattern that had always existed in her life. She had always been the jealous sister, the one who couldn't accept her own flaws and instead projected them onto me. Her bitterness and insecurities had always been masked by her charm, but deep down, I knew she was struggling to accept her own imperfections. I had spent so much time trying to win her approval, but I had finally realized that it was never going to happen. She would always be the one who resented my success, who couldn't see me as anything other than a threat to her own fragile sense of self-worth. The reality of her marriage, I knew, would eventually crumble. It wasn't just because of her jealousy towards me, it was because she had never truly faced her own inner turmoil. No amount of a perfect wedding or a perfect life would ever be enough to fix that. I didn't wish for her to fail, but I knew that she couldn't continue running from her own flaws forever. As for me, I had reached a turning point. I had found my voice, and it was powerful. The woman who walked out of that wedding was not the same one who had entered it. I had taken control of my story, and I wasn't going back. No matter what anyone else thought, I was finally free to be who I was meant to be. And that, to me, was the sweetest victory. The journey of self-discovery and transformation is a powerful reminder that our worth is not defined by others' expectations, but by our own understanding of who we are. In life, especially as we age, it is easy to fall into the trap of seeking approval from family, friends, or society. We may spend years trying to fit into molds that others create for us, forgetting that our true strength lies in embracing our individuality. The story teaches us that the pain of judgment and criticism can be transformed into a source of strength, as long as we choose to stand tall and honor our own journey. It reminds us that the path to happiness and fulfillment begins when we stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward. Just as the protagonist reclaimed her power by refusing to let her family's expectations define her, we too can take control of our lives at any stage. The key to peace and happiness is self-acceptance, knowing that it's never too late to become the person we were always meant to be. Every challenge, every moment of struggle can lead to growth if we choose to face it with resilience and confidence. The lessons of embracing change, trusting ourselves, and rejecting negativity are timeless, offering valuable insights for every stage of life. Thank you so much for watching. We hope Sarah's story has inspired you to take control of your own narrative. Remember, it's never too late to make a change. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update from Silent Wars. We truly appreciate your support, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that inspire and empower.